So the purpose in terms of this particular activity, tracing of requirements, is to ensure that the requirements and design, they're aligned. They're actually whatever you're trying to propose in terms of design of the way that you perform something, the architecture, the design, high level design, low level design, the technology suite or this technology stack that you're proposing, all of them are in line with what is required of this product or the platform or the application. So you don't come up with some random idea. I want to use Java today. Why do you want to use Java? What is the reason? What do you want to achieve? Why do you need it? What is the motivation for us to create a product? What's the application? Is it going to be web or mobile application? Who is going to use it? What are their needs? What are their problems? So all of that would form the basis for you to be able to take a decision about a technology or an architecture or a design or a visual design or some user interface or some kind of branding guidelines, whatever you want to do, everything is actually driven by the requirements, the what, why, when, where, and how, right? So requirement traceability in that context is used to ensure everything actually, whatever you do is going back to the requirements, because that is the backbone, as we discussed, that is the spinal cord of whatever you're trying to do with respect to the project or the process or the initiative. So you need to make sure that all the tasks that you do as part of your life cycle actually maps back to something that actually is of value. And that would help you in defining the scope, in managing the changes, risks, the time, the cost, and the communication, everything. So basically, that would really help you with traceability. Requirement traceability would really get you to that and detect missing functionality and gaps in requirements. If you do not have a requirement that's actually mapped to the architecture, that means that there is a gap. So something is missing. So some requirement is not addressed in your solution. So you can really go back and change it. So traceability is basically from, as we discussed, the forward traceability is from the requirement through to the architecture, the design, the low-level design, the development, the testing, and the test cases and the test results. And finally, perhaps the server in which you're deploying all that. So if you, this is forward, if you do not have this kind of thing, if something is missing, if some requirement is not addressed in any of these elements further down into the life cycle, that means that you have missed that requirement. So you can actually kind of take a step to go back and correct that mistake or address that requirement. And same way goes the other, in terms of the each of these elements, if there's some changes that needs to happen, what is leading to that? If you found some block of code lying there and you didn't understand why you're using that block of code, or why you're using a tool and not the other one, then you need to understand what is the fundamental basis for that. And you need to connect it all the way to what's the design, what's the architecture, what's the requirement. Oh, okay, so we're using this because this is the requirement. The requirement states that we need to have a web interface for exposing our APIs to third-party web services websites. Oh, okay. So that's because of that we are using the API source here. We are using a new technology of exposing our APIs, right? So there is a reason why you have done this, and that also has got, this is the backward traceability of the test cases, the test results, or the piece of code or tool that you've used or architecture elements, design, all of that again need to be traced back to the requirement. So that's the backward traceability. And why do you need this forward and the backward traceability? Essentially, that would help you understand the impact of if there's any change anywhere in the process, in the cycle, all the way through, you can easily understand what's the potential impact it could create. If I have a change in this requirement for example, from a web interface, I want to change it to a mobile application. What is the impact that is going to have on the architecture, on the design? How much of design should I redo? How much of architecture should I rethink? How much of code should I rewrite, right? So that's all the things. So that is a forward traceability. So if a small little change in the context of business requirements, saying that I want this website to be responsive, or I want this to be able to work on the mobile phones as well, it needs to be able to work on the mobile phones. And then the architecture, what should I change in the architecture? What should I change in the design? What should I change in the code? What more should I do, right? So that's what is important for the impact analysis. Deep insights in scope and complexity of change. Again, that would give you an idea in terms of what is the extent of the change we're talking about. If you're changing this one little thing here, how is it going to impact others, right? So that is important to understand. So what is the extent, what is the level, what is the scale of impact it's going to have if you make a small little change here in across the entire application. And address requirements versus unaddressed. So assessment, that's what we're talking about, the gap, right? So what if we have missed some of the elements of requirement in addressing that in the solution? What should we do to include that? What more should we do? So that's the kind of thing that we would be able to take a decision on and move. Very, very important again. So what are the inputs for this one? We have the requirements and the design coming as inputs for this one. And what we do as part of the tracing of requirements, we need domain knowledge, obviously, because that would help us to understand what is important to be able to trace requirements. For example, if we're talking about healthcare application, you can't ask a banker to talk about that as, hey, what is required? They don't have a clue. So we need to have people who've got the domain knowledge of the healthcare or the life sciences or hospital management to be able to say that, well, this is missing here because they know the details. They're the people who are specialists and experienced people in that particular knowledge area of the industry. You also need to address the legal or regulatory information because that's where often we do not look at that thing, the small print, it goes for a big toss. You end of the day, a product might actually be a failure or it could have had a loophole in that which could be exposed and it could unauthorized elements could make use of that. They could swindle money. They could actually do all the kind of things that could potentially lead to loss of millions or even billions of pounds to the organization. So we should really be very careful about what are the legal requirements, what are the regulatory requirements, what are they talking about, what are the business rules we need to really stick to. Information management approach in terms of how we're going to communicate these requirements, what are the kind of channels we're going to use, what formats do they expect us to deliver this, what is the extent of documentation, is it a user story, how is sharing their information, should it be shared at all in the first place, who are we going to share this information, all that. And requirements management tools in the repository, what are we going to use, which tools are we going to use, are we using Trello, are we using Jira, are we using Rational Requisite Pro, what kind of tools are we using, Word, do we need any licenses? What kind of licenses? Is it enterprise license or is it per seat license? All of these, and typically these are called care tools, or this is called requirement management tools. Basically, or could we call it computer-aided requirements management tool or engineering tools? So care is basically computer-aided requirement engineering tool. So care tools are basically that would help you to understand the softwares or what applications that you would use to perform these different tasks. And then what are the other aspects that are related to this one? Obviously, defining the design options would depend on this because once you have a good idea about the requirements, how they're traced back and forth, you'll be able to come up with the design options in the high level and the low level design and other things. So very important. So what if there is a gap in the requirements? We can just talk about it because very important. We need to address this before we go to the other aspects. So why do you need traceability? We talked about traceability of the requirements would actually help you to identify the any gaps in the requirements. What would lead to the gap in the requirements? That means that the gaps could potentially talk about the fact that you missed something totally, or you delivered something which is lower quality or lower value. So that means that you didn't live up to the standards. You didn't deliver the requirement to the specification that you had agreed upon. And they would then lead to what is a kind of a breach of trust, right? At the end of the day, that's not what we've agreed upon with the clients or with the customers. And that's where we end up in a problem space, in a problem. So the gaps could be in terms of trouble in understanding customer needs. We did not understand the customer needs properly, and that's where we actually failed to capture the understanding. We have not really understood the real needs of the people or the real problems and the pain areas that they're having at the moment. If that is not understood, then we're not addressing the right problem. We're not serving the right people, isn't it? So in fact, this is so important that when there is a study called Standish Group, research, which actually did a research work conducting a huge study across all the organizations developing IT projects, essentially IT software, IT and software development projects. Back this is about a good 15, 20 years ago. And they launched this huge study, and they got to understand that a lot of IT projects are actually ending up as failures and flops. And the reason, when they did a lot of the studies, why is it happening? Why not? All the study, end of the day, the outcome is that the problems with respect to the failures are, there are so many problems and so many root causes, but then the one main cause is down to requirements. About 76% of the projects fail because of requirements not communicated properly, requirements not captured properly, requirements not updated properly, requirements not specified in the right way. So it's all down to how you manage the requirements. And this is very, very significant. That tells you the importance of actually, capturing, specifying, communicating, and maintaining the requirements the correct way. So, I mean, it's needless to say, requirements need to be recorded in an organized manner. They need to be verified. They need to actually validate some requirements. When they say validation, then we're not sure. So that's what I keep telling people, that assumptions is very, very important, that you actually validate your assumption. There's nothing wrong in assuming something that you do not know. But when you assume something, make it really clear that this is an assumption. This is the assumption that I have based my understanding on, or based this requirement on. You need to specify and then validate it as soon as possible, because otherwise, if you just do not if you do not specify your assumption and say that, people might mistake that as a fact, and that would ultimately lead to a big, big problem, big trouble. So I would say that we all need to, as BAs, we should be very careful about what we're trying to assume. And then if we are saying that this is an assumption, then we need to specify that clearly, that this is an assumption. And the most immediate moment that we can actually come to, we need to validate that assumption with the right stakeholders, right team members, so that that assumption is no more assumptions. Actually, either, okay, this is either true or false, and based on that, we say, no, based on my discussion, this is what is the understanding level. So very, very important to validate and and verify your assumptions. Change is not controlled by proper mechanism. That would again lead to gaps if it is not controlled. If the changes come from so many different directions, and they're not managed, you're not capturing the user feedback, for instance. People are telling you, customers are reporting you all the problems, all the areas that needs to be changed, all the things that need to be changed, all the things. That's what we call as the customer voice, right? The customer voice is actually kind of very, very powerful, but there's no way to capture it and store it and then analyze it and then being able to take an action on that. Then all that fantastic gold mine of customer feedback is lost. So you're just ignoring all that gold mine. You're sitting on the gold mine, but you're not really realizing it's like the goose and the golden eggs, right? You have literally killed the goose with not listening to the customer feedback, not being able to taking action on that. So which is total waste of all the effort that you've done. And lack of solid foundation for software that users want to build. So again, the foundation will only come when you have clear understanding of what the vision is, what is the mission, what is the mission for this particular business and for the particular program or product or project. What is the fundamental need for us? What is the motivation? Who are the users? Why do they need this application or product in the first place? What is their need? How are we addressing their needs, their problems, what are the opportunities that we have got? What are the threats that we're facing? How can we overcome those threats? Who are the competitors for this? What are they doing? How can we try and fight off the competition? How can we be ahead of the competition? How can we quicken this time to market? How can we make sure that we have got there quickly than our hundreds and thousands of competitors, especially in this era of internet and web. It's so difficult to be ahead of the competition, all with that, because your competition is just, they're not somewhere outside, or they're not somewhere totally unrelated. They can be just at the click of a button or click of a mouse. You've got your competition coming in and taking away your business. So it's so important that you are aware of these potential gaps in the requirements and address these. And in the context of tracing the requirements, again, for the process or business traceability, we talk about it in terms of value chain, right? So we've got supply chain management, where you have suppliers and vendors, all of those, and the people with inventory, they're coming in, and then you're trying to create something that you're getting the raw materials, you're trying to work on the raw material, you're trying to create some process, you're adding some value to that, and then that's going to deliver some value to the end users, and a lot of different activities, tasks, and things like that are involved in this. And that would potentially generate the value chain, whether it's a product or whether it is a manufactured assembly unit, or it is a small little nut in the wheel nut in the car, whatever it is. Everything is, or a steering wheel or a component or third party, whatever software, everything is actually contributed. You're creating some value out of that process. Whereas in the context of software requirements, it's pretty much the same. So you've got business needs, just like the value chain and the business. You still have business needs. From the business needs, the business need is the vision, the mission that is actually triggering and driving this whole project. And from there, the business requirements, we want this customer to be able to do this, blah, blah, blah. And then the stakeholder requirements, the needs, the solution requirements are basically what the software should be able to do. And once we have the solution, that's where the previous set of requirements writing, like FRS and the SRS, the software requirement specification, the functional requirement specification. You know how we used to write that? We used to write it as, this system should be able to do this, this, this. The system should be able to perform this reporting. The user should be able to perform the functionality of adding a new user using the system. That's how we used to actually write the requirements as, should be able to, the system should be able to. That's how the requirement used to start, and then used to go in detail. But now with Agile, you're flipping the pyramid. You're actually inverting the pyramid. You're actually putting the user in control and command, and you're driving the whole thing with the user in the focus. So the user should be able to do this, this, this. The user should be able to achieve it. As a user, I would like to do this. Why? So that I get this benefit. So you're actually trying to justify, understand the motivation of why the user should be able to do this, use this feature or do this task, right? So that's where it's important for us to understand the solution requirement, the context of users, not just technical stuff, but how much of business value and how much of true value, perceived value it is actually generating and delivering to the end customers, end users. That's the important thing. It's not to us, it's the end customers that need to be satisfied and be happy with using your product or features of the product. So that's what we do, the design, we do the coding, testing, and validating all of those there.